First up is Moana 2, which is the sequel to the Disney animated film, and I will say that the first Moana film is, I think, one of my favorite modern Disney films of all time. I love the music, I love the animation, I think it's beautiful, I loved seeing an original story. It was just everything I wanted in a classic Disney animation film, repackaged with a modern lens. So, there wasn't a love story. She wasn't technically a princess. I was just like, yes, give me more of this. Careful what I wish for, because then they said, hey, we're making Moana 2, and I went, oh no, don't do that. Now, this originally actually was supposed to be a Disney Plus series, and if you are like me and work in entertainment, and especially if you come from an animation background, you are gonna see the seams of where this was Frankenstein from a series back into a movie. Now, this doesn't mean it's a terrible movie, but I just was like, did we really need this story? And I do actually think the character of Moana does have more that they could have explored and, does have a second story in them. But the film that we got in Moana 2, I don't think is that film. It's very derivative of the first one, which is not unexpected. I think that's generally the case with most Disney animation sequels. Moana is back. She's a few years older. She now is trying to wayfind and find other cultures and people and if anybody else out there. And I think the biggest challenge with Moana 2, and this is coming at from the lens of adult, I will take a moment to say that I went with my friends and their kids, and my friend's little kid gave it 100 thumbs up. So this is not a terrible movie, but there just are so many things that, because we've seen the first Moana, we know can be better. So again, Moana's a little bit older. She's wayfinding, and of course, an adventure comes to her. And this time, she's taking a crew with her. And this is where I certainly saw the seams of like, oh, each of these characters was supposed to have their own episode, and you've now just condensed it down, which I don't actually hate. Like, some of them I'm like, I don't think you needed your own episode. But this time, she's joined by a crew of folks and then goes on adventure, and then we find more deities, gods, etc. And of course, there is some sort of epic culmination at the end, and that is the movie. Dwayne Johnson is back as Maui. Tamora Morrison, Nicole Scherzinger, and Alan Tudyk are back. And then you've got Rose Matafeo, David Fane, and then my new favorite character is a character called Matangi, who's played by Aoi Fraser, who I wasn't familiar with, but she does a lot of the voices for the Maori language dubs of all the Disney movies, and she is spectacular. And I was just like, oh, I'm really actually glad that they wouldn't cast an actual person of, an indigenous background. And two, she can sing. But speaking of the music, it's big shoes to fill with Lin-Manuel Miranda stepping out of this, and this musical duo called Barlow and Bear actually stepped into it, and I really wish that they had been given the opportunity to do the music very much in their style. I feel like they were asked to do their version of Lin-Manuel songs, and you can really hear it in like the rock songs, and they keep referencing back to the music of the first one. I'm like, just let them do their own thing. Like, if you're gonna hire new people who have a distinct style, let them do that. If you're not gonna do it and you just want them to do the same things last time, like, keep the other two composers to return. But it was just... it's a shadow of the first film. And because the first film is so good, it's like, it's tolerable to watch, right? Like, I didn't want to walk out of the theater. I was like, I know where this is all going. I'm along for the ride. Okay, whatever. A lot of pandering jokes, like more physical comedy, I think, in this one than the previous one. And again, some of this is like, I know this is coming from the show because they were like, we have to intersperse bits here and there. But when you condense it all down into one movie, you got to recalibrate. And I don't think they had as much time to do that as they wanted. All the side characters probably get too much time in this. And this is really Moana's story. And I'm just like, we're getting distracted here. But overall, if you have kids who are of an age who can see Moana, like toddlers probably, maybe not ready for this, like, you're not going to have a terrible time. They're probably going to have a very good time. We can meet in the middle there. If you are like me and just an adult who is a fan of animation, this is not going to live up to the expectations of, it's not going to like break your heart in the way that certain other sequels did. Like, I've talked about Gladiator 2 and the way it just made me sad about the first Gladiator. This doesn't sully the first Moana, but it certainly doesn't enhance it. So I'm going to give this a 3.8 out of 5. My next film this week is called Our Little Secret, and it is a Lindsay Lohan Netflix original holiday film. And I was very much looking forward to this. This definitely checked the boxes of, the kitschy things I am looking for in these holiday films as someone who does not particularly celebrate the holidays that they celebrate in these films, and also just loves, campy cinema. Now, this was a weird one for me. It is not as campy as I would have liked, and in fact, it has too many real actors, I think, in it. Now, if you're comparing this to something like Hot Frosty, right, which does have actors of note, but they're utilized in a very specific way, and they're not like front and center. They're in a secondary storyline. I thought that worked great. This one, too many good actors, and you go, oh, this makes me sad that you're having to do this. So Lindsay Lohan stars as, a high-powered business consultant, ? And she, had a young romance with her neighbor / family friend who's played by Ian Harding. And, they grow apart, and then circumstances bring them back together these holidays, and they end up in the same house that has lots of people in it. Kristen Chenoweth is in this. I I thought she was the best person in this, but, she's doing her own thing. It's hard to dim her shine. She plays kind of like a spooky mother-in-law type character. You've also got Jonathan Rudnitsky. You've got Tim Meadows. You've got Judy Reyes. You've got Chris Parnell, Dan Bukatinsky. And I'm just like, okay, so these are all real, kind of comedic actors, ironically. There's very few drops of comedy to be found in this. The leads have zero chemistry, and that works for part of it because there is an antagonistic relationship between them. But I was just like, oh, this is one of those ones where it's like watching wet cardboard next to each other. But there are some very bizarre, very funny moments. But I think because there's no chemistry, because this is an earnest romance film, and because there's no super surrealist factor, I was like, oh, I wanted this to be so much better. There is one sequence that is absolutely worth watching, but I honestly think you could watch it without the context of the rest of the film, and it would still be funny. I will acknowledge that I thought, and this is in the trailers, the whole thing behind it is they are brought back together because they are both now dating members of the same family, which is why they end up at the Kristen Chenoweth's, kids' house for the holidays. And I actually thought, based on the trailers, that the whole thing was that the two guys had dated in between. And so the secret was like they had a relationship and everyone's bi or pan or whatever it was. And so now they were trying to hide it, not that Lindsay Lohan and Ian Harding are trying to hide their relationship. So I was deeply disappointed when I found out this was a completely heteronormative film. Maybe that's on me for misreading the trailers, but I was like, this isn't that much of a secret. Who cares? And not that it would have been a big deal that the guys had dated, but I thought that would have made it much more interesting. So sadly, I do not think our little secret, unless you're like the, number one Lindsay Lohan fan and you see all of her stuff, which is totally fine. It's really nice actually to see her like healthy and acting. Although when I say acting, she is so one note in this, except for the one sequence that I don't want to ruin because it was actually very fun. It's just like a frantic level of acting to her. There's no breathing. She's always like in a rush, it feels like. And I'm just like, take a chill pill. But yeah, this one, not as fun as I thought it was going to be. Again, if you are blazing through these things, like you just need a new one every day or a week or etc. So it'll be fine for that. But yeah, this is a skip if you are a casual viewer of holiday films like me.